Let me welcome each and every one of you to ServiceDesk Plus Masterclass 2022. I'm Steffi Benjamin here. I'm a part of the user educator team. And today we're going to see how you can perfect the change enablement process in a hybrid workplace using ServiceDesk Plus. So, the goal of this session is to know how you can plan and deploy a major change in an organization, irrespective of wherever your associates are. So, the agenda for this session is that we're going to discuss what is change management and its various types, and we'll see what are the essential components to maintain an efficient change management process. And finally, we'll see how Zilker, an organization, handled a major change in their company using Service Desk Plus. So, when it comes to change management, so what is change? For I am assuming that most of you are aware of what a change is, but for those of you who don't know, a change is a planned activity that we are bringing into our organization, and we are looking to usually deploy changes in phases or in segments. So, this planned activity affects the IT services or even sometimes your business services greatly. So we have various types of changes. The three most well-known changes are standard change, major change, and emergency change. So standard change is typically pre-authorized and it happens on a routine basis. So a good example would be updating OS patches on a service regularly. While a major change is a high risk and a high impact change, meaning that if you don't plan a major change properly, you will end up affecting your production environments. And for that, an example would be infrastructure migration, or when you migrate from on premises to cloud applications, or when you're upgrading the infrastructure in your organization, those constitute a major change. And then we have emergency change, which we just saw about in the poll. The emergency change is usually deployed in response to a system outage or some kind of issues. And like the example we saw, when there is a 0 day attack, the security patch is deployed in response. So this is what constitutes an emergency change. These are not the only changes usually well known. There are also normal changes. There are significant changes that happen not routine but periodically once in a while. So these changes are lesser known, so we will not be looking much into them. For this session, we will be focusing mainly on major change, and we will now go and discuss. Before we look at a major change, we'll discuss what is the blueprint for a successful change. So, a successful change has four simple steps. One is when you define what a change is. So when I say define, you should not only define what the change is, but you should ensure that the change you're deploying is aligned to your company's vision and mission. You should be able to explain to your users or your employees what is changing, why is it changing, and what are the various roles involved in bringing about this. And finally, you should be able to define the timeline to set the change and keep the deadlines in place. And once you've defined what the change is, you then go ahead and plan the change where you create a change request. So this is where help desk softwares like Service Desk Plus come into play, where you're creating a change and you are looping in your stakeholders and you're letting them know what part they're playing in, and you should be able to identify the impact of this change. How will this change improve your company's working conditions? What are the negative impacts it could happen? What are the risks we are facing, and how are you going to work around those risks? So those are usually predicted, and you keep a rollout plan and a backward plan in place. And once you set your entire planning and your plans are all done, you then go ahead and implement the change where you engage with your stakeholders and your associates, and you are regularly informing people about this. And as the change is being deployed, you ensure it is moving carefully and gradually, and that you are able to manage whatever issues or risks that might happen. And if the risk that you predict actually do happen, you should be able to deploy your workaround plan and bring the change to completion. And then once you've implemented your change, you finally have the fourth step where you ensure that the change you just deployed is being sustained well in your business working conditions. And you should be able to ensure that your organization is adapting to the change. And if you need to reinforce behaviors to help the change sustain, then you go ahead and reinforce them. And finally, you take a look back and you see if the rollout plan and the change plan went as planned, or what were the unexpected issues, and you look back and you try to learn from what happened. So this is the blueprint for a successful change. But do all organizations follow it? We'll go ahead and see now about Zilker and whether or not they followed this successful blueprint. Now, Zilker is a use case. We're just considering Zilker to understand how change management happens in a real world environment. So let's say that Zilker is an audio streaming and media services provider. So they've been having an increased amount of demand for their content, and since they've had an increased demand, they have tried to work hard and push themselves forward, which put an extremely high amount of strain in their server infrastructure. So they decided to upgrade their server infrastructure in order to meet the demands of the audience. Now, a server infrastructure definitely qualifies as a major change, because if you don't plan an upgrade properly, you could end up uh, affecting your data, you could end up affecting all the work you've done so far, and therefore this definitely constitutes as a major change. Now, did Zilka follow the blueprint? Absolutely not. It turns out that they went ahead with a very blurry process where instead of handling a major change like it should be handled, they decided to handle it like every change in the company. So in other words, they took a one size fits all approach, which is a very unadvisable path to take, especially when it comes to major changes. So, because of this, they had unexpected setbacks. They were not able to handle the outages, and they didn't have the resources in place. They didn't communicate with the end users about the outages that could happen. So, the end users were not aware, and when they face disruptions, they are surprised by it. And they did not have a proper approval mechanism, which meant that there was delay in the approvals and in the processes that followed. And without proper visibility into what is happening, there was confusion on what stage they are in, and without automation, further delay was faced. And since the change was not systematic, as in it was not consecutive, it was very ineffective. And without a rollback plan, they had to face loss of data and chaos. Now, enter Service Desk Plus. How could Service Desk Plus help Zilker? Now, ServiceDesk Plus has an entire module called Change Module dedicated to helping organizations plan and deploy changes. But this is not limited only to Change Module. We also have Project and Release Module that vastly support change in and help users bring about changes strategically. So they are able to gatekeep each and every phase of the change and ensure that the change is planned and implemented. So when we were talking about the blueprint, you would remember we had four phases. We had defining, planning, implementing, and sustaining. So the defining in Service Desk Plus, from Service Desk Plus's perspective, would happen in the submission stage, where you define the change, then you plan, and you automate the approvals involved. And once you all this is set in place and the planning is over, you then go ahead to implementation, where project management comes into play. And once you've manage the project, you then go ahead and release the change, where release module comes into play. And once you've finished all this, you review the change and you ensure it is sustained in your business environment, and finally you close the change. So this is how Service Desk Plus would help Zilker. Now Zilker decided to take up Service Desk Plus, and what happened? So the change enablement was completely perfected. So in ServiceDesk Plus, we have a set of features and functionalities that can help you plan each and every phase of change management. So first, we have change customizations, where you can configure the various change types that happen in your organization. You can define the roles, stages, and statuses to manage your change cycle. And then you can take all these configurations and consume them in the change templates, where you create different templates for different change types, for standard templates and major templates and so on, and you configure different kinds of workflows for each template. And as the change request is created, the request will be broken down into the 6 stages that you have configured, and wherein you can go ahead and record your impact plans, your rollout plans, and so on. And once you've set up all this, you then go ahead and start communicating to your end users about the outages. You make sure that your stakeholders are informed of the latest changes, and not only through workflow, but you can also automate the change deployment using project and release management And finally, you carry out a post-implementation review and ensure the change is sustained well. And once you've completed this, you can then go back and analyze the change metrics using reports and dashboards. Now, I've just given you an overview of the features available. We'll now go into the application and we'll see it all in action. So this is your, let me log out a moment. So when you open ServiceDesk Plus in your application, this is the page you're greeted with. So let's say you log in as an administrator. So we are now in ServiceDesk Plus version 13, and uh, we are in the administrator's login. So this is the homepage you're usually greeted with. To set up the change module with all the customizations and workflows I was talking about, you need to go to the admin tab, where under customizations, we will first see various change management customizations. So here you can see the various tabs: change types, risk, and so on. So in these tabs, we have some default values, but you can go ahead and define according to your organization what are the change types you usually have. Do you just have major and minor? Do you also deal with normal or low risk changes? You can define all of them here. And then we have risks, where you define the usual risks your organizations run into when they deploy changes. So sometimes an organization might regularly run into data loss risks. Sometimes they run into risks where users are not able to handle changes properly. So you can define all of those risks here. And then you can define the reasons for which changes are usually deployed. And then you can go ahead and configure a change advisory board called CAB for short. So the CAB is a designated group of users or technicians, and they usually assist the change manager in various parts of the change request. So you might need a board of members to plan your change. You might need a different group of members to deploy your change. So you can configure as many CAB or as many change advisory boards you want from here. So here you see we have a committee for just research purposes, and we have 3 users there. Similarly, you can plan CAB members for different reasons. And then we have change stage, which is one of the fairly important customizations when it comes to change module. So in Service Desk Plus, we only have 6 stages, and you cannot add any more stages, but you can rename and define the stage here. I'm sorry. So you can rename the change stage and the description, but you cannot add anything further. And once you've added these 6 stages, you can go ahead and define the various roles usually involved in bringing about change. So these roles are dynamic, and they should not be confused with the system roles present under users and permissions. So under users, we have a set of system roles. I'm sorry, this page. Yes. So these roles are assigned to a user, and when a user is assigned to this role, they handle this role throughout the instance. So if I am the SD admin, I am an SD admin throughout the instance. But unlike this, when it comes to change roles, these are dynamic, meaning for each change or for each change template, the user assigned to this role can vary. So we will see all this in a moment and how you can configure all this. For now, when it comes to setting up the change role, you can limit the role to only technicians or based on sites, or you can assign even end users to a role. And once you've created a change role, you can go and configure statuses for all these stages available. So let's say you have 6 stages. So for each stage, you can configure different statuses to indicate the progress within a stage. And finally, we have change configurations, which is just a bunch of miscellaneous configurations where you can fine tune your access. You can send recommendation mail. You can choose if you want to include attachments while sending mails and so on. So these are just to help you fine tune your change module. Now that you've configured all of this, you can go to templates and forms, where under change template you will be able to consume all these configurations. So once you click add change template, you'll be taken to a template or a canvas where you can define how you want your change request to look. So we already have a template in place. Let me take you in. So here you can see that we have the template name, and we have selected what workflow it should follow. So we'll check out workflows in a moment. Before that, we can also mark the change template as emergency and set it as default if needed. And once you've set up all this, you can go to the canvas below, where you can see The stages you configured is reflected as a field. The statuses you configure are reflected within the field. And we configured reasons, which is reflected here. We also configured risk, which is available in the left pane. If you want, you can drag and drop it where you need it in the template. And if you check, you can see the risks we configured are reflected here. If you don't want a field, you can remove them using this icon and it will be moved back to the left pane. Some of the fields like stage, status, and the roles like change requester, owner, and change manager are hard coded because they are prominent and very important for managing change requests. You cannot remove them from a field, but you can either mandate them or you can choose to leave them not mandated. Now that you've added all the fields relevant, you can create your own custom fields using add new field option. So you can drag and drop it where you want the new field to appear, and you can define what field you want. So let's say I want a field that says level, and I can describe what the field is. I can say if it's a single line, multi-line, or a pick list, and add multiple values to the pick list. And the numbers here indicate how many additional fields I have left. So we have a limit on how many fields you can add to a template. And once you've defined all this, you can click OK and the field will be reflected in the template. And if I don't want this, I can remove it again and it will go back to the left pane. So you can use it further on in some other template as well. And once you've configured all of these fields, you can go ahead and save the template and you'll be taken to change roles tab. Now, unlike the change owner or requester or the change manager role, which are prominent, these roles are optional, meaning you can either have them to a template or not. So if you want, you can drag and drop them. If you don't want them, you can leave, and it will be available in this pane here. And you can also create a role directly from the template. It will just redirect you to the change roles page we just saw a while ago. And once you've defined the change roles, you can go ahead and configure field and form rules. So let's save and proceed. In field and form rules, you can define set of logical rules that apply certain actions to your change template depending on the user's input. So they give a very dynamic nature to templates. So when a change form is loaded, uh, as in on form load, or when the field value within a form is changed, or when the change form is submitted, you can perform a set of actions. So let's say that when I'm loading the form, I want to disable few stages, I want to hide few fields. I can define them in the form load. Or if I have on field change, here I can say to ServiceDesk Plus, if my user is telling that the change model is confirmed, let's show certain fields and mandate them. So this is how field and form rules work. And if you don't specify a condition, the field and form rule will be applied to the template irrespective of whatever happens. So you can limit it to either only when a change request is created or only when it is edited as well. So once you've configured field and form rules, you can click save and your template is completely set up. So users will now be able to create the change request using this template, and the roles will be added to the template. The field and form roles will be applied and so on. So once you've configured your template, you can then go ahead and configure the workflow. So I was just talking about workflows. So if you go to automation, we have workflows present there. And the workflow is a sequential process where you can define the how the change should proceed, which stage should it enter first, and what stage it should go to next. And you can also in between stages you can define various actions that can be performed. So here we already have a workflow in place, but I will first show you a new workflow to explain the elements to you. So you can create a workflow with name, description. You can define if it's a general workflow or an emergency workflow. So an emergency workflow would typically have as less stages as possible and more approvals to ensure that the change is deployed properly. So you can see that by default two nodes are present. So these are called nodes. The nodes are present in the stencil here. So you can drag and drop to add a new node to the workflow. So let's say I want to add planning stage and I want only three statuses to be shown: approved, rejected, and planning in progress. So I click save and the node is added. So I can say once the change request is created, it moves to submission stage. And when the status is changed as accepted, let's go to planning in progress under planning stage. And apart from stages, you can also add conditions. So conditions help you check a condition, and if the condition is satisfied, the workflow goes in a specific direction. If it is not satisfied, it goes back in a different direction. So this helps you define which way you want your change to proceed. Like, it branches your workflow into two ways. For example, let's say I want to check impact, and let me select the impact field here and say if impact is high, let's save it. Yes. So when the stage is approved, we check the condition. If impact is high, we move forward to, to complete it. If impact is not high, we can reject. This does not constitute, this is not relevant for this workflow. So this is how you configure condition. You can see that the workflow is branched out into two directions. But in some cases or in some fields, just a yes or no condition would not satisfy our needs. So in which case, you can configure a switch node. So a switch node is like a condition. It refers to a field value and decides which way to go. Except in this case, you can configure multiple directions. So it's essentially a multi-way branch node. So let's say I have this particular pick list field here. So this field has three values configured, and say yes. So I can now say if the stage is approved, we move to this switch, and depending on what value, we can plan. Okay, this means completed. If there are major issues, let's cancel it, and if there are minor issues, we move back. So this is how a switch node works. It helps you branch your workflow into multiple ways and decide upon it. So other than switch, we also have notification nodes, which, as the name indicates, is pretty simple. You just send some notifications to your users. You can select what notifications you want to send. And if you want, you can create a notification from scratch as well. So you can you can use the dollar variable here to define uh, different values and so on. So once you've create a notification node. And this is not the only way to add notifications. You can hover over a status, and you can see an envelope icon appear here. If you click on that icon, you can configure a notification for when the change reaches that particular stage and status. So let's say I configure this notification to multiple users and I save it. The icon is now highlighted in yellow, showing that when the change reaches this stage and status, a notification will be sent. So apart from this, we can also configure approval levels. So while configuring approvals, you can say if you want anyone, I'm sorry, let me choose some approvers to begin with. So let's say I have three users here. And if I want any one of them to approve, if I want everyone to approve, or if I want to just record the first response action, as in if the first user to approve is rejecting the change request, then the request is rejected. Or if they approve, the request is approved irrespective of whatever others might say. So this is how we configure approvals. So we were talking about cab members. You can also configure cab teams to approve. So let's say we want a planning team to approve the change plan. So when we change reaches here, let me say, let's check the approval. If it is approved, we go here. So this is how approvals work. You can bring in your department users, your cab users, and your change role members to check the change and approve them. And then finally, we have field update, which is pretty simple and straightforward. So you basically select a field and you say, irrespective of whatever value it has so far, we can update the value now. And you choose it, and the field value will be updated. So when you create a change workflow, ensure that the workflow is linear and not circular or incomplete. As in, we have two nodes here that are not saved. So if you try to save the workflow now, ServiceDesk Plus will throw an error. So always ensure that the workflow is completely linear and has a definite path from start to end. So we're not saving this workflow. Let me go back and show you a saved workflow to say how the workflow, to show how the work path is. So you can say that when the change starts, so this is for the server updates that Zilker was facing. So we have said that when someone in Zilker raises a change request, it moves to submission. And if it is accepted, we check a condition. And if the condition is satisfied, we move forward to planning. And once the plans are approved, we move forward to approval stage, where we have the CAB members record their approval. Meanwhile, we've also said we can also send a status notification letting our users know that the change is now in the approval stage. And then we go to the implementation stage, where once the implementation is completed, we once again send notification to our users and we check the value of the implementation details using a switch node. And depending on what the implementation details are, we either do a field update or we check the condition or we send a notification and we proceed further to review and closure. So this is a completely working change workflow, and this is associated with the change template. Now, if you go to your change module and you create a change request, we have a change request here. So let's say I select server changes template, and you can see that the workflow is automatically updated depending on what we selected in the template. And let's select a requester and a change manager. And you can see here we have a field called change type. And you can see below the reason for change, there is an empty space. Keep your eye out on the space because you would see if I change the value of this to major, then a field appears here. And if I change the value of this to yes, we see one more field appear here with mandate. So this is field and form roles at action. So this is how they give a dynamic nature to your change template. So once you record all these details here, you can go forward. You can say which user you want for various change roles. So this is what I meant by dynamic roles. This user is not fixed. It's because they are in the template, they are pre-populated. You can go ahead and remove them and configure some other user as well. And once you save the template will be saved. We're not creating a change request right now. Let me show you a created request with proper details so you can understand all the features within it. So this is created using the same template and the workflow. And as you can see here, we have the details populated well, and we are in the submission stage. So this is where we have created a change request. And once you accept it, it will move to the planning stage. So in the planning stage, you can say, you can perform an analysis and say, this is the impact of the change. And you can upload attachments to explain further. You can define your rollout plan and say, this is the way I want the change to be rolled out. And then you can go ahead and give a backout plan in case a huge risk appears and you have a very negative impact scenario. You would want to restore the servers or the server upgrade. You will want to stop the process and restore the servers to a previous working condition. So when Zilker runs into issues like this, they would need a backout plan, obviously. So here you can record the backout plan and you can add a checklist to say, let's perform these checks and before we proceed further. And finally, you can define downtimes. So downtimes would mean what are the services that would be disrupted, what are the services that could temporarily stop working when the change is being deployed. So say Zilker is upgrading their server. Obviously, at some point in time, their files would be inaccessible. They might have network issues. They might not be able to process certain requests and so on. So all this would come under downtimes. You can record what downtimes you predict would happen in the planning stage. And if you want your end users to be aware that these downtimes could happen, then you can go right back up. And in the actions tab, you can make an announcement wherein you say this is the description, that this is the we are facing a downtime. You can select an announcement type and say a service is down, a service is being launched, and so on. And you can either display the announcement to all users or just your technicians alone. Or if you want only selective users to be aware of some downtime, then instead of making an announcement, you can send a notification to the selected users alone. You can just enter their email address here and send the notification. So this is how you plan your downtimes. And the downtimes that you plan here will also come later on as we're deploying this change. We'll look at it in a while. So before that, let me also show you that you can associate problems and requests to a change. So a change doesn't always happen by itself. A change is sometimes brought in response to a problem. Take Zilker. They had a problem where their servers were not able to process the uh, increased workload. So they would have noticed the strain either as slow network or slow processing of data. And all these issues would have been there, which would have been reported as incident request. And as the technicians were troubleshooting the incident request, they would have noticed that it has a common problem, and therefore, in response to the problem, they're bringing the change. So you can record all these incidents and associated problems in the planning stage. So we have associated a problem here saying this change is coming in response to this problem. You can also associate the request or the incident request that gave a rise to the problem. Or sometimes when you're bringing about a change, or even when you're planning a change, users would already start saying, because of this uh, process that's happening, we are facing some new issues. So you can record all of that here and track them from the planning stage. And then once you've approved your planning stage, the change moves to the approval stage. So here you would see that the approval node is triggered only when this status is reached. And once the status is reached, the approvals that you configure in your workflow will be reflected here. So if you have, let's say you have not configured a workflow with the change template, in which case you'll be able to add approvals directly from the approval stage. So let's say, let me send an approval to my administrator and send, yes. And we can see that we can take an action directly from the UI itself. You can take an action and say, I recommend this change, and say approved. So the change has now successfully moved to implementation. So once in implementation, you can and before I go further, if you are another user and you're not logged in, you can also perform approvals from your emails. So you will receive a hyperlink in your email in the configured email address, and you can perform approval from there. Now, the changes in implementation. Now, for a small change or a minor change, you do not need projects and release module comment. You can directly plan that change, implement it, and get it done with. So for that, you can configure the all the tasks involved under this task details. You can record the worklogs, the various works different users did under the worklog details, and be done with. And you can see that the downtimes we planned in the planning stage are now shown in the implementation stage. So, so here, when it comes to Zilker, they are doing a major upgrade in their servers. In which case, they would need to plan this meticulously through projects and releases. So, in projects, you can associate a project. So we already have a project associated. Let me take you to the details page. So here you can see that we have already created a project, and the details of the change are populated into the project directly. And a project is basically a grouping of various tasks. So in the project, you design you break down the amount of work or the quantum of work into doable little parts called task, and you assign the task to the relevant users. You make sure they get the task complete. That way the project is handled. Now, these tasks are grouped into various milestones. So, each milestone refers to a particular phase within the project. And in a milestone, you have the task like I was talking about. And here you can mark dependencies between the task. You can see that uh, let's trigger a certain task or a child task only after the parent task is triggered, and so on. So you can mark a dependency from the dependency map. We're not getting too much detailed into it. But once you mark a dependency, it will be reflected with an arrow mark in the list view. So this is a milestone and the task within a milestone. Now, if you go to the Tasks tab, you would see that all the tasks present under the milestone are now shown here. So here you can also add further tasks that are not related to any milestone and track them as well. And if users are working on this project and they have completed certain part of it, they can add a work log to the task, and the work log will be reflected in the timesheet. So it's very important for us to record all this, because in a project you usually define what are the resources that you need to bring about a certain change. So these users are working on to ensure that all the resources, all the and everything else is in place for the change to be implemented. So as all this work is being done, they record the work log, and the work log can be tracked from the timesheet. And the various users who are working on this project can be managed under members tab. So to add a user to a project as a member, they need to have a project role first. And unlike change roles, project roles are not dynamic, they are systematic, meaning that if you go to in customization under project management, you can create whatever project roles you want. And once you create them, go to your users details page. Let me edit them. And in this page, you can configure the project role to them if you want them to be an admin or a manager and so on. So only if a user has some kind of project role associated to them, only then will you be able to add them as members to a project. And once you've added all this, you can go to the Gantt view where you get a bird's eye view of the various tasks within the project. So in the Gantt view, you can show you can view the different tasks, you can view the dependencies and how they vary with time, and you can plan your entire project schedule from here. So you can see that you can see a very faint gray line connecting two tasks here. I'm sorry, okay, you can see this line connecting the two tasks. This indicates a dependency. You can see that certain part of the bars are highlighted. This indicates the percentage completed and so on. The dependencies are also indicated using the dependency icon here. So you can hover over a bar and you can add a task. You can view the task details. You can view the comments, add the work log, or you can instantly update the schedule time and the actual time and so on. So once you've configured all of this, you can then go to the resource management where now instead of in the Gantt view, you planned the time or the project schedule. In resource management, you get an overview of the workload of your project members and you can plan how much task and which task a person should be completing and so on. So you can view the distribution of tasks among your users and or the project members, and you can track how much are they being overutilized or underutilized. Meaning, your users you might have a limited number of members working on a specific project, and you need to ensure that you're able to utilize the person's time as much as possible. So, for example, we have administrator here who's working. Who's having 9 hours of time left on the project. So they are underutilized. On the contrary, you can see that this particular user is overutilized by 36 hours. So in which case, you can take the task assigned to them and simply drag and drop it to another user who is having the time available. So you can say that the time is being changed. So you can, if you want to extend the time, you can drag it to a new to wherever you want and simply modify it. So as you can see, you can instantly manage your task distribution from the resource management. And then you have comments where you can specify certain comments and communicate them with your technicians and so on. In the associations tab, we have associated a release. So as you can see, I'm sorry, as I was saying, a change is deployed through, in Zilker's case, it is deployed through a project. And in the project, the Zilker's team has ensured that all the resources are collected and ready for implementation. And then you take these resources and actually implement them in the release module. So going to the release module, we already have a release request in place. The release module is extremely similar to your change module. They have a set of predefined stages, but unlike change module, you have 9 stages here, and you cannot create any more stages, but you can uh, edit and modify them. And each stage has by default it has 4 tabs: details, task, notes, approvals, and status comments. So the approvals here will be triggered from the workflow. So as you can see, we can see the workflow from here. So all this is configured just like in change module. You can configure all of this from the admin tab. And so you can see that we are here and we can move forward, and the workflow is now mapped. We do not have approvals or anything configured here because they are all present in the change module. You can go ahead and add tasks within each stage and say, here, let's take all these resources we planned in the project and go ahead and implement them. So you can plan in the planning stage. Once again, we have downtimes here. So since this release is associated to a change, the downtimes present in the change will be reflected here automatically. You can also go ahead and add more downtimes during the release stage. But since the stage is completed, you're not able to add anymore. Otherwise, you will be able to add more downtimes. And then we have the development where you develop the the uh, the the release to happen, and then you start testing it to a closed group or just within your team. And once the testing is completed, you go to user acceptance testing, where you do a beta release maybe and check within a control environment how the release is functioning. And finally, you go to the deployment, where the release is now publicly deployed. And here you can once again see we have downtimes. It is reflected from the planning stage here. You can add more downtimes because in some cases, unexpected downtimes happen during release. So you can record them here, and you can also update the actual downtime. So you might have scheduled the downtime at a specific time, but the actual time might have varied. So you can update all of that here. And finally, we have training, where you train your users how they can adapt to the release just deployed, and then you review the release went smooth, and then you close it. So to move the release to a closed state, we can go ahead and we can simply change. We can you have to gradually move it from let's say completed and update. So the release moves to training. So this way you can go ahead and update the status at each point in time and close your release. And here once again we have release roles, which are dynamic just like change roles. We can add more users. These are all present in release templates. So all this I will just give you a short preview of where they are displayed. So under release management here, you can configure downtime types, you can configure release roles and other specifications. In templates and forms, you have release templates, where if you see a already present template, you can see the template here. Drag and drop if you need a field or remove it. And one feature I would like to highlight is in release template, you can highlight certain fields using customization. So you can indicate this field is important or mandatory using colors, different fonts, and so on. You also have roles here. We do not have field and form rules for release templates. So once you've set all this, you can track your associations, the task present under each tab, and you can add reminders to communicate with your technicians or your task owners what they should be doing. You can view the work logs they added from here. You can view the approvals performed so far, and if they have any conversations, as in if there are emails that were sent, if there were system notifications or just notes, you can view them all from the conversations tab. So once you close the release, we can go back to the change and we can complete the implementation. So since the implementation is over, we now have the review stage, where you ensure that the change was rolled out like planned. If there was any other thing you would like to record, you can record them here. You can schedule the next review to happen after a specific amount of time. And finally, you can complete the review, and you can close the change, where you can add a closure code. So if the change is closed completely, you can say it's closed, or if it was cancelled, or if there's anything else, you can mention the details here and save it. Okay, let me say implemented successfully. So we can complete and the change will be closed. So we have now successfully brought a change to close. Zilker's server is upgraded, and now Zilker can go ahead and look back on the performance. So they can go to the reports tab here, and you would see that we have a set of reports present already. These are predefined. You can go down and choose a report relevant to change module. So we have reports by all changes, pending changes, completed changes, and so on. And they can view the changes, how they were completed based on priority, urgency, and so on. If you don't want a predefined report, you can always create a custom report, or you can use queries to fetch any data you want from the service desk instance and create your own report. You can also schedule reports to be created once in a while and review your performance maybe every week or so. So I'll just create you a predefined report. Let me create reports by impact. So I have a report present here. It is generated. I can add this report to my dashboard. So let me add it to my dashboard. Okay, this is already added. Let me create an alternate report to explain better. So let's say I want to create a report by status. Okay, so this is also added. So you can see here that we can add a report and to the dashboard and ensure that everyone is can view it or just the logged in user and update it. So select which select which dashboard you want them to be under and update it. And once you added it, you can go to your dashboard, and here you will be able to track your service desk performance in live. And if you scroll down, you can see the widget we added is present here. So you can refresh them constantly to fetch the latest data and so on. So this is how you track your performance. Now going back to the slide. So that's all the features we wanted to discuss. We'll do a short recap where we about the session. So we saw what are changes, we saw the different types of changes, and we saw how you can manage different change types using customizations, templates, workflows, and so on. We also saw the various stages within a change request and how you can configure a cab to approve your change and help your change manager bring a change to completion. And then we saw how you can implement a change using projects and release management, and how you can ensure your stakeholders are informed of the change at various stages or statuses. And we finally saw how you can do a post implementation review and ensure a smooth closure and go back and analyze your performance. If you want to learn more about change management, you can check out our admin guide and our release notes. We also have a huge number of product videos present in our YouTube channel. We have a community present. You can access it from our website and come and talk with your peers. We also have a support portal, and we have hello at servicedeskplus.com, our email address available at all times for your doubts, your questions, and your feedbacks. If you do have a question, you can always contact us later on in the email address on screen, or you can send them to my email address, steffi.b@zohocorp.com. And thank you very much for joining in. We hope this session was informative to you and you did learn more about change management in Service Desk Plus. And I hope to see you all again in the next episode about asset management. Until then, it's a goodbye from Steffi. Thank you, everyone.